Albrecht Dürer's 1515 etching, Agony in the Garden, depicts an ordeal of intense emotional and spiritual torment. On the Thursday night of Holy Week, what is called Maundy Thursday, Christ is moments away from being arrested. In fact, a band of soldiers, being led by Judas, can be seen at the left. Knowing the events of the passion that imminently await him, Christ pleads to be spared from this cup of suffering. However, he ultimately accepts the authority of God the Father, saying, "Your will be done." Presenting Christ as a model of faithfulness, Dürer's image takes the viewer through the conflict and resolution of this crucial moment of the Passion. Throughout this video series, we have referred to the Passion of Christ. But what is the Passion? And furthermore, why is it called the Passion? The Passion of Christ is a term used to collectively refer to the events of his suffering and crucifixion as described in the Gospels. But why is Christ's trial, torture, and execution called his Passion? We often associate the word passion with love, particularly romantic love. However, the word passion comes from the Latin word passio, which means suffering. It wasn't until the 16th century, after the time of Durer, that the word passion began to take on the meaning of amorous emotion. In fact, William Shakespeare was in part responsible for reinventing how this word is used. Scenes of Christ's Passion were among the most frequent subjects in Northern Renaissance art. Furthermore, as the art of printmaking developed in Europe during the 15th century, prints of the Passion, both individual images as well as series of the entire Passion narrative, became popular. Passion iconography and the print medium seemed a perfect fit. The stark graphic quality of the black and white print was catalytic to the visualization of emotionally intense scenes. Also, the comparative inexpensiveness of prints made them ideal for images designed for the personal piety of the modern devotion movement. Many of the print series of the Passion began with Christ's announcement at the Last Supper of his impending betrayal. And while the scene is not one of suffering, the resurrection was often the concluding image of these series. In previous videos, we have looked at examples from 3 of Dürer's Passion series. The so-called Large Passion, created between 1497 and 1510, is composed of 12 prints. It begins with the Last Supper and ends with the resurrection. Dürer's Small Passion is named that because the images are much smaller than his previous series. Created between 1508 and 1511, it is composed of 37 prints. It begins with Adam and Eve and concludes with the Last Judgment. While Dürer's design seems to have been to show that the purpose of Christ's Passion was the central theme of human history, the Small Passion extends well beyond the traditional range of Passion subjects. Dürer's Engraved Passion is distinguished from his previous 2 Passion series, which are both composed of woodcuts. The Engraved Passion is a set of 16 images. It begins traditionally enough with Christ in the garden, but it ends with an event from the book of Acts in which 2 disciples of Christ, Peter and John, heal a crippled beggar. Why Durer included this scene in his Passion is a question still debated by scholars. What everyone can agree on is that throughout his art, Durer attempted to reinvent the scope and potential meanings of Passion imagery. While the number and range of subjects included in each of Dürer's Passion series is different, their essential narrative trajectories and sacred purposes are similar. In each case, the spiritual journey of the Passion is from suffering to salvation. The objective of Dürer's Passion imagery was to draw the viewer into a more intimate spiritual connection with Christ and thereby inspire piety and devotion. One of his most gripping images of Christ's Passion is Dürer's 1515 etching, Agony in the Garden. This is a single print, not a part of any series. In this devotional image, Durer seems to have challenged himself to capture the entire narrative and purpose of Christ's passion in a single print. Through his use of line and a contrast of light and darkness, Durer takes the viewer through a spiritual journey of Christ's obedience from suffering to salvation. If Durer's objective was to capture the entirety of Christ's passion in a single image, there is perhaps no subject better suited for this purpose of inspiring the viewer's spiritual sympathy than the depiction of Christ's torment in the Garden of Gethsemane. In order to more directly connect the viewer with Christ, Durer situates him in the foreground of the image. In some previous depictions of this subject, such as his print from the Large Passion, Durer placed sleeping disciples in the foreground. This composition takes the viewer through a visual narrative of Christ's agony as a dramatic event. The faithless disciples slumber, unaware of the importance of this moment. Their state of physical sleep could be read as representative of their spiritual state. These disciples are also a foil of Christ's suffering and piety. Christ is at this composition's center, responding to an angel who offers him a cup symbolizing his suffering. Christ raises his hands. As in many of Durer's images, one gesture conveys two meanings. Christ's raised hands can be simultaneously read as his desire to refuse this cup and as an act of worship and obedience. Continuing to read this image from left to right, we see the approaching figure of Judas. This anticipates the next event in the Passion narrative, the arrest of Christ, which is also the next image in Durer's sequence of the Large Passion. In his etching, Durer moved the sleeping disciples over to the left side of the image. This suppresses the narrative aspect of the print and focuses the viewer more intently on Christ's state of spiritual being. This etching is no less dramatic than the woodcut. However, the dramatic action here is internal. Durer's woodcut from the Large Passion is powerfully effective in visualizing the event. The etching visualizes Christ's experience in this moment. Durer's composition gravitates towards Christ's face. Here, the visual language of Durer's lines draws the viewer into Christ's agony. The agitated marks of this etching not only form a depiction of Christ's face, they visualize the intensity of his spiritual, emotional, and even physical suffering in this moment. In a previous video, looking at Durer's engraving, Christ carrying the cross, we explored how printmaking is an art of lines. While the lines of an etching are created with a different method than those of an engraving, it still holds true that Durer's image of Christ in the garden is created through a complex network of lines. The energetic and rough character of these lines evoke the desperation of the moment. The print image is also created with a relationship of contrasts. The visual foundation of the image is the exchange between the ink and the paper. In Durer's print, the paper becomes a part of the image. Cultivating this relationship of darkness and light, he was able to translate the visual contrast between the ink and the paper into an articulation of Christ's spiritual triumph through suffering. As the lightness of the paper itself reads through Durer's web of lines, he was able to visualize Christ's radiance. Looking at the light and shadow on the tree and the rocks, it seems as if nature itself is being illuminated by Christ. This light is Christ's glory, which is his reward for his faithfulness as demonstrated in the Passion. As a devotional narrative image, this etching of the agony in the garden takes the viewer on a journey through conflict that arrives at completion. Presenting Christ as a model of faith to be imitated, Durer succeeded in visualizing physical suffering and spiritual triumph in a single image.